to talk and think about. Here now is Jenifer Graziano and Time to Talk.
Good morning, Westchester. It's 9 a.m. on Monday, and that means it's time to talk with me, Genn Graziano. I'm a licensed funeral director who oversees my family's funeral homes, Cox and Graziano of both the Mamaroneck and Greenwich, and the Zion Memorial Chapel of Westchester. Every week, I come to you discussing important topics and sensitive matters that all of us need to pause and reflect upon at some point, and through this show, I hope to provide a platform to do so. Good morning if you're joining us on the air at 1460 WVOX. We'll take questions, comments, and calls to 914-636-0110. Hello to Kevin in the control planning. A little bit of a heavy topic, but what better for a Monday morning than being proactive? I'm joined by John Genn. He is a vice president and senior trust officer for Tompkins Financial, with offices located in northern Westchester. However, he runs the gamut of the county for his client base, and lots of good information he's going to share with us. So good morning, John.
Good morning. It's great to be here. Happy to help people.
And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. So although I am a funeral director and I operate 3 funeral homes, I'm also an attorney. So I'm always very mindful, not that I cross over and work, switch my capacities. However, I'm always mindful of the fact of the need to plan ahead. Right. And I really have like a front row seat to watch the outcomes when people have not planned ahead. So everyone puts off what's uncomfortable. It's human nature. We say, we'll do it tomorrow. I'm probably among the great procrastinators myself, but I'm sure you have a lot more war stories than I. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
And let's talk a bit about quickly your role for Tompkins Financial, what you do, and explain to the listeners and viewers who you are.
Okay. I've actually been a trust officer for different banks over the last 35 years. And a trust officer's role, as you know, as an attorney, is the responsibility to serve as an executor or a trustee on behalf of the bank clients that have asked the bank to serve in that capacity. And that responsibility is the same as if you were to name your child to serve as the executor or someone else. There's a list of responsibilities that need to be done and taken care of. Some of them have to be done within a certain period of time. Other things just have to be done, period, not necessarily on a schedule. And obviously you want them done right. So there's a large list of things.
I's dotted and T's crossed is perhaps nowhere more important than here. So we're going to touch on a word fiduciary today quite a bit in the next 30 minutes.
Appropriate.
Yes. So just explain so we kind of, level the playing field, what it means when we say acting in a fiduciary capacity or a fiduciary of the estate. What are we speaking of that you can educate the audience on?
Well, the responsibility of a fiduciary is that each action that you take has to be in the best interest of your client. And it's different when you are speaking with a broker or you're speaking with someone that has a fiduciary capacity because a broker might not have that focus is what's best for the client, but what might also be beneficial for them. The fiduciary doesn't have that flexibility. Their actions in serving as the executor or the trustee have to be in the interest of the client. Now, if we decide to buy shares of IBM stock and the stock goes down, as long as we bought that with the belief and facts that led us to believe that that was going to be a good investment, and it would be in the best interest of the client, that's fine. But perhaps buying a very risky stock that might not fit into the goal of the beneficiary, that could be seen
That's where it gets tricky.
Yep.
So when we're speaking of a fiduciary, we're talking about a good faith relationship, acting in good faith, proceeding in good faith. It's a trusted position, and it's a legally recognized position. So you're acting on behalf of an entity or a person or a trust, the trust having being its own entity and agency, and you are carrying out directives always in the best interest of who or what you are the fiduciary for.
Correct.
So just to get us started off the bat. So let's now talk about when you are selecting an executor. And I want to talk about these things because a will is a vehicle for disposition. A trust is a vehicle for the protection of assets and ultimately how the assets are disposed and allocated. So there's always a directive. You're always following a script. It's
Correct.
not that, you're just saying, oh, okay, well, dad passed away. I believe I should have everything, or I believe he wanted this. You are following, you're bound by, a legally spelled out set of instructions. But when it comes time to do this planning, you have to select a person. I want to talk a bit about what should go into the thought process of selecting an executor. And taking it one step further, what does an executor of a will, we'll keep it to wills right now before we move, onto the trust realm, but what does an executor actually do?
Good question, because it does vary. As I mentioned earlier, 35 years of doing this, I still have experiences handling estates that I've never done before. So each estate does have its unique characteristics, but the common characteristics is the identification of the assets, the valuation of the assets, the collection of the assets, the distribution of the assets according to the terms of the will. Your comment about needing the guideline as the executor, you can't say, oh, I know mom wanted you to have this, when the will says, no, it's going to your brother. So the executor needs to follow the terms of the will. That's what your responsibility is.
And it's a process. So, upon the death of a person with a will, there's a probate process, and then the executor is formalized, correct? The will contains who the executor is.
Yes.
And there's a process there. Walk us through a bit of the process.
Sure.
And again, going back to why it's so important to choose the right person in this role.
Okay. The probate process, a lot of people tend to get nervous about the word probate or the process probate. What it really entails is the location of the original will, completing the probate petition, which needs to be filed with the court in the county in which the decedent lived and died, or lived at the time that they died. And then when you file that probate petition with the court, you file the original will. And then the court will contact all the beneficiaries that would have inherited from that decedent's estate if there was not a will. And then once that process is done and all those I's are dotted and T's are crossed by the court, they appoint the executor to handle the estate. That executor is named in the will. And the responsibilities then are to, as I mentioned before, collect the assets and go through that. The challenges that the executor is going to face, or the responsibilities and challenges most likely together, would be how do I identify where mom or dad had all these assets if I wasn't familiar with them or involved with them during their lifetime? How do I file their final income tax return? How do I file how do I know what assets are going to different beneficiaries? Some accounts are joint, some aren't joint, some have designated beneficiaries. What about her investment account? Can I continue to do trade in her investment account? Do I have to move it to an estate account? There's so many different responsibilities that the executor needs to know what they're doing, what they're getting into. I had a conversation recently with one of 11 children, and he's saying, yeah, I know you're going to be surprised, John, but we don't all agree on what we should do for mom at this point.
No.
Shocking, right? I mean, I have 4 siblings and we don't agree. So, and it was interesting. My parents are both deceased at this point, but, they named my sister Kathy, who's the oldest, as the executor, executrix as a female. My sister Patty, who took care of my parents and lived very close to my parents and was joint on most of their accounts, knew everything about them, even though my sister Kathy was an hour away. And I do this for a living, but I was 2 hours away. So it was we joked in that, it's important.
So let's go back to naming an executor. And when you have the situation with multiple children, and you're a classic example, because there's always going to be one that's a primary caretaker. And it's not always a bad thing. It's not always, a reflection of an unwillingness on the other parts, but sometimes it's just a reality situation that one can do it more readily than the others. So sometimes there's that propensity then to make everyone to be inclusive. So you're going to name the one who might be more physically and geographically removed to do this work. Again, there's a presumption of neutrality in the under the guise of being an executor or an executress. I mean, you're not there to make decisions. You're there to administer. It is a job. It isn't a role. And actually, there is an administrative compensation for, is it statutory of
It
a
is
percentage?
statutory in New York State.
Is it 3% of the estate value?
It is a floating scale. It's
Okay.
5% on the first 100,000, 4% on the next 200,000, 3% on the next 700, and then 2.5% on the next 4 million.
Wow.
You know,
But again, as you've outlined the duties and responsibilities, if you have a sizable estate, you know, this is not an easy task. So what do you find, what is your advice in naming an executor? Is it better to take this out of the realm of your offspring and move it to a neutral third, you know, on a disinterested third party? And let's talk about executors also. We'll go into it. Interest, you know, what they can they be a beneficiary under the will? So, but how do we name them?
Okay. I often will tell people that, you know, first I want to ask them, you know, do the kids get along? And do you want them to continue to get along after your death? You know, do you want Thanksgiving dinner to be friendly and amicable amongst all the family and in-laws and so forth? So, you know, those are things that people don't always think about. I have heard many stories of people, you know, getting upset, or in-laws, you know, my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, you know, getting a little bit accusatory because they, you know, their spouse hasn't gotten their distribution yet. Well, it doesn't happen in a 2-month span. You know, it takes a lot longer to work.
Probate is a process, for sure.
So probate will take a couple of weeks, a couple of months, most likely, depending upon the court. And with COVID last year, things are taking a little longer in certain courts now. But in choosing your executor, you have to keep in mind that the individual, same as a corporate executor, has a responsibility and some liability, so that if they do something wrong, the beneficiaries of the estate can, you know, file a claim against them through the surrogates court, which supervises all the estates administered in the county. And if you're an individual and you've done something wrong, it's not inconceivable that the courts can say you need to put up X amount of dollars to make this, you know, right, so to speak. In choosing your executor, you need to give some thought to, okay, who's a good communicator, you know, amongst the beneficiaries? Who's going to be able to communicate with these beneficiaries in an effective way? You want it to be an amicable way, too, but it really needs to be effective. You know, if I name John, is that going to create World War III amongst my siblings? You know, my issue over Thanksgiving dinner. And one of the other responsibilities are the management of the assets. Does this individual I'm thinking about naming have the ability to manage these investments? I've got a $2 million stock portfolio. Who's going to start managing that after my death? Do they continue to manage it? Do we liquidate it? You know, what's the appropriate steps to be taken? The executor then is responsible also for the final income tax return, which I mentioned earlier, but now the estate becomes a tax entity, and that has to get a tax ID number and has to file annual returns as long as it's open under that tax ID number. And those tax returns are different than our 1040. It's actually called 1041, as you probably know. But those fiduciary tax returns can't be done by just anyone. You want an accountant that is familiar with it, because there are unique deductions there that you want to make sure are taken so that you're not paying extra tax dollars, just like we want to avoid paying extra tax dollars for our own personal returns.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, again, you really want someone who's going to be able to pull it all together.
Right.
An effective communicator, a knowledgeable person, a person who's task-oriented. And you know, it's not that they're there to benefit from this. They're there to administer. They're there to carry out specifically assigned directives under the will. Who can be an executor? Can you have, you know, an interested executor, someone who's a beneficiary under the will? Can they serve in that capacity?
They can, Jen. It's appropriate for an executor to be a beneficiary as well. The challenges then are really along the lines of to make sure that their actions as the executor, as the fiduciary, the term you introduced earlier, again, their actions have to be in the best interest of all the beneficiaries. They can't act in a way that's going to be beneficial to them and negatively affect other people. Right. So if that individual is going to be a beneficiary under the estate, they also have to make sure that they're taking care of, taking steps to also do what's best for the other client, the other beneficiaries as well. And listing all those responsibilities, you might have to go out and hire an accountant. You might have to hire an investment advisor. You might have to, have somebody help you with the record keeping. A corporate fiduciary is an option that a lot of people don't know about. Tompkins Trust Company is one of the local entities that has fiduciary powers granted them by the state of New York. And we have served, as I represent the bank in that capacity, as an executor. The benefits of having a corporate fiduciary is that we know what needs to be done, we know how it needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and we can do it all in-house.
And you have no ulterior motives or interest. If you're just joining us this morning on 1460 WVOX or Facebook Live, good morning once again, and I'm joined by John Genn, Vice President and Senior Trust Officer with Tompkins Financial, and we're discussing the role of executors, who to best name as an executor, and really just some important administrative planning ahead information this morning. So thank you, John, as our discussion continues. Can you explain a bit then how clients get to you?
Sure, and they get to us in a few different ways. Some are just introductions by some of the branch managers or the branch staff when they go into the bank to work on do some financial transactions. Often those people get to know them pretty well, and eventually I might get an introduction to these people shortly after someone has died, or they're retiring, or someone in their family died. We introduce the idea and the question of, is your own will up to date, and have you done one? Sometimes it will come from an attorney who's working with one of their clients, and there's a situation where they're looking for perhaps another option to naming their son or daughter, or maybe they don't have family and they want to have an executor obviously handle their estate and close out their affairs. So accountants are, again, another source of referrals for us, because they get to know these clients pretty well. And yes, they can handle the tax aspect of it after the decedent's death most times, but they often don't want to take on that personal liability and also additional responsibilities as an executive, because they're running their accounting practice. And most accountants have a lot of work on their desk and not looking to add a whole lot more responsibility as an executor.
Shout out to the accountants today on the new tax day, so May 17th. But yes, that's very true. It's one more, and it's a big undertaking for sure. Now let's talk about the trust. A trust is a great vehicle for estate planning. It's a way to protect the assets, to remove them from the probate process. How does your role serve in terms of a trust? Can you be appointed, the trustee? How does your role switch gears from a will to a trust?
They switch gears slightly, really, because we still have that fiduciary responsibility under the terms of the trust. A will is a blueprint of what you want to have happen, and nothing actually happens under the terms of the will until after your death. But if you create a trust during your lifetime and fund that trust during your lifetime, well, then that trustee has to step up and start serving in that capacity when you sign that trust document and fund that trust account.
So it's a matter of life or death, really.
It can be.
When the work officially begins. But again, it all comes down to administration and carrying out the directives that are there.
Correct. And there are many different types of trusts. So I often will get into a conversation with someone that comes in and says, "Oh, I need a trust." And why is that? "Oh, I was talking to a friend of mine, and this happened to them, and they said I need a trust." And I said, "Okay, well, what is your situation? What is it that you're trying to accomplish?" And it becomes a lot easier for the individual to understand the benefits of a trust if we actually start at the end and work our way to the beginning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. See, what the intention is, start at your end point and work backwards of how to best get there.
Right. What kind of trust it fits that.
Do you work closely with the state planning attorneys? Is there kind of a team that's put in place, or do these meetings usually take place with the person who's planning ahead? Let's say yourself, an attorney in the room. How does it usually look?
Very often it'll start with a conversation, a one-on-one conversation with me and the client, or maybe one of their children or spouses, and then I will, in essence, get them teed up for the attorney and let them know, here's about 20 or so questions that the attorney is going to ask you.
Okay.
And the information that they're going to need. It would be beneficial for you to give some thought to perhaps the answers to these questions, so that when you do meet with the attorney, and I always recommend meet with an attorney that specializes in the trust and estate field.
Absolutely. I say it here from this mic all the time. You cannot leave this to, general practitioner that does traffic violations, divorces, and wills and estates. You got to...
There's a reason why they specialize in different fields of law. Mm-hmm. And, if you're going to care about how your estate is carried out and so forth, it really would benefit you and your executors and your beneficiaries to have that document drafted by someone who does that kind of work all the time. And to get back to your question is, then the clients are ready to go and meet with the attorney because they've got the list of their assets. They know how each asset is owned and registered. They know how they want the assets to be distributed and so forth. And then, as we're talking about here, they have some idea as to who they want to name as the executor or the trustee, because you can create a trust that is under your will. So that trust doesn't get created until later and carries out. And there are different benefits to a trust as a way. Trusts typically don't reduce your taxes, but they do help you control where your assets go during your lifetime if you wish. But after your death, you can control what happens to those assets by using a trust. And for some people, that's beneficial because if your beneficiaries might not be able to, I say, if you put this $2 million in their checking account, how are they going to do? Are they going to manage it okay? Are they going to be out of money in 2 years? If you put it into a trust account and you have the income for their benefit and you give the trustee discretion over the principal that if they need emergency funds to buy a new car or pay medical bills, you can have the trustee give that authority to your trustee and say, instead of putting it all into my kid's checking account where it'll be gone, in 2 years, I might set it up with the trust. And that way, this will benefit them over their lifetime. And if they get married and perhaps divorced, perhaps the assets in the trust can be structured in a way that it doesn't become part of the divorce settlement.
No, it's so true. And so important because, these life events could really shatter a lifetime of what a person worked to accumulate.
So true.
So John Genn, Vice President, Senior Trust Officer with Tompkins Financial, he can be reached at 845-654-0211. That's 845-654-0211. And going to the web at www.tompkinsfinancialadvisors.com. And they can find you directly there?
Yes, they can. And just to correct a common mistake, Tompkins is spelled Tompkins.
We'll say phonetically. Tompkins. Very true.
A lot of people like to put an H in there.
Yes, very Tompkins. Tompkinsfinancialadvisors.com. Well, John, I want to thank you because this is really important.
Tompkinsfinancial.com.
Oh, well, there you go. But really important information. So thank you for sharing with us. And I hope that the takeaway today is that plan ahead and have these important conversations. It might be uncomfortable, but you're not. It's designed to really protect your children's relationships too upon your passing. So you're not looking to create feuds and animosities. It's all about preservation.
Right.
You're preserving your assets. You're preserving your legacy. You're preserving your family. So I think if you spin it and look at it as a positive, it might serve as a more motivating factor for people.
Have that conversation. Talk with the trust officer, get the information you need, and then make an educated decision that fits your situation.
That's what it's about, educated decisions. I'll give you the phone number one more time of 845-654-0211. John Genn, Tompkins Financial Advisors. And thank you for explaining us what goes into selecting your executor and why we need to select an executor. And great information. A lot to think about this morning as we start our week.
Thank you for having me, Jen.
Thank you. And this is Jen Graziano thanking you for taking the time to listen as we took the time to talk. Have a great day, Westchester. Bye-bye.